The Princess and the Witch's Fireworks. The Kingdom of Everveil was a place of quiet beauty, wrapped in the embrace of towering forests and cloaked by mist that seemed to hum with secrets. Once a year, the mist lifted for the Festival of Lights, a celebration that summoned laughter and song to the cobbled streets. The air would be rich with the scent of roasted chestnuts and honeyed wine. And as night fell, the sky itself became a canvas for the kingdom's most spectacular displays. This year, however, the festival had taken on an unfamiliar air. It wasn't the usual parade of lanterns or the humble fireworks crafted by the kingdom's artisans that had stirred the crowd into a frenzy. Whispers of a witch's handiwork had drifted through the streets for weeks, claiming she had crafted fireworks so breathtaking, so potent, they bordered on the divine. Princess Althea stood at the edge of the bustling square, her emerald cloak blending into the shadows. Beside her, Prince Caden leaned casually against a lamppost, his expression that perfect mask of royal indifference. But Althea could sense his unease. It mirrored her own. The crowd gathered tighter as the final firework display began. At first, it seemed like any other, cascading blooms of gold and silver against the ink-black sky. But then came the shapes. A serpent of emerald fire slithered into being, hissing through the air before exploding into 1,000 stars. A crimson phoenix followed, its wings unfurling with impossible grace, each feather etched with flames. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The magic was undeniable, the air heavy with it. Althea's breath hitched. These weren't mere fireworks. They felt alive. When the final burst came, a thunderous display of violet and amber, it painted the heavens with the silhouette of an enormous tree, its branches stretching beyond the horizon. And then, as if whispered on the wind, the words came. "Make your wish." The voice was low, feminine, and laced with something ancient. It was the witch, though Althea couldn't see her. A ripple went through the crowd, like a tide drawn toward a distant, irresistible force. "I wish for my son to return," cried a man near the center of the throng, his voice breaking. His face was gaunt with grief, and his clothes hung from him like shadows of better days. The air stilled. A spark fell from the heavens and hovered before the man, its light casting eerie shadows over his hollow face. Then, in a flash, the spark flared, and from the shadows stepped a boy. The boy's hair was dark as coal, his eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural sheen. He stepped toward the man with slow, deliberate movements, his face an unsettling mimicry of innocence. The crowd erupted into cheers, oblivious to the wrongness that seemed to radiate from the child. Althea's hand tightened around Caden's arm. "Did you see his eyes?" Caden nodded, his jaw set. They weren't human. The witch's voice rose again, though her figure remained unseen. "3 wishes," she declared. 3 wishes and 3 alone. Choose wisely, for the cost is yours to bear." The crowd buzzed with excitement, and Althea felt a chill creep into her bones. The display had been beautiful, but it had come at a price. She could feel it, like a thread of wrongness woven through the fabric of the night. She turned to her brother. "We need to find out who she is." Caden hesitated, his gaze flicking back to the crowd. "And what do we do when we find her?" "We stop her," Althea said. Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart thundered. This was no ordinary magic, and this was no ordinary threat. As the festival carried on, its revelry, hollow beneath the weight of what had just occurred, Althea and Caden slipped away into the shadows. The witch had brought her fireworks, her wishes, and her power to their kingdom. But Althea knew there was more to this than met the eye, and she feared the final wish was one the kingdom might not survive. The quiet that followed the festival was unnerving. Everveil's streets, usually alive with lingering chatter and the flicker of lanterns long after festivities ended, were now steeped in an eerie stillness. The magic of the witch's fireworks lingered in the air, a faint hum that seemed to creep into Althea's thoughts. She sat in her chambers, her window ajar, watching the distant glow of the festival grounds. The faint sound of revelers had faded into the depths of the night, but Althea couldn't shake the image of the boy who had emerged from the shadows. His eyes haunted her, faintly glowing with a light that felt neither living nor dead. Her thoughts were broken by a soft knock. "Althea," Caden's voice called, low and steady. "Come in." The door creaked open, and her twin entered, his cloak dusted with dew. He had been out wandering, a habit of his when he was restless. His expression mirrored her own unease. "I spoke to the man who made the wish," he said, settling into a chair by a hearth. "The one who brought back his son." Althea leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What did he say?" Caden hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair. "He swears it's his boy. Says the witch's magic gave him back what he lost. But when I looked at the child, Althea, he doesn't blink. He doesn't breathe." The word sent a shiver down her spine. She had felt it too, in the boy's movements, in the unnatural stillness that clung to him like a shadow. "There's a cost," she whispered. "There always is," Caden replied. The twins fell silent, the crackle of the hearth filling the room. It was Caden who finally spoke, his voice low. "She's planning another firework tomorrow, a second wish." Althea stood abruptly, her mind racing. "We can't let it happen. We have to find her." The next day, the square was abuzz with anticipation. News of the first wish had spread like wildfire, and now the kingdom waited with bated breath for the witch's second display. The twins mingled with the crowd, their faces hidden beneath simple hoods. Althea's heart pounded as she scanned the sea of eager faces. The witch's magic had captivated them. Her promises of fulfilled desires, turning even the most cautious villagers into dreamers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the witch appeared. Or at least her voice did. It carried over the crowd, smooth and intoxicating, weaving a spell that seemed to bind every soul present. "Tonight," the voice called, "another wish shall be granted. Another soul shall find their heart's desire." The crowd erupted in cheers as the first fireworks soared into the sky. It was a spiral of silver and green, twisting like a serpent before exploding into a shower of emerald sparks. The witches' displays were more than light and sound. They were alive, imbued with a magic that made them pulse with an otherworldly energy. A man stepped forward, his face lined with desperation. "I wish for wealth," he called. The air stilled, and Althea's breath caught. A single spark drifted down, settling in the man's open palms. The crowd gasped as golden coins began to pour from his hands, spilling onto the ground in glittering heaps. But then the man staggered. His face paled. His breath came in shallow gasps, and he crumpled to the ground. The coins continued to spill from his hands, even as his eyes dimmed. Caden grabbed Althea's arm. "We need to leave." She couldn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the man, now lifeless, surrounded by wealth that had cost him his soul. "Althea!" Caden hissed, snapping her out of her trance. Together, they pushed their way through the stunned crowd, their hearts pounding. That night, the twins sat in the safety of their chambers, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing down on them like a shroud. "She's toying with them," Althea said, her voice trembling with anger. "She grants their wishes, but the cost, it's too high. She knows exactly what she's doing." Caden nodded grimly. "We need to find her before the final wish. If we don't..." His words trailed off, but they both knew what he meant. The witch's fireworks were not gifts. They were traps, and with each wish granted, her power seemed to grow. Althea stared into the fire, her resolve hardening. The witch had enchanted their kingdom, but she had also underestimated its protectors. They would find her no matter the cost, because if they didn't, the next wish might be the kingdom's last. The forest surrounding Everveil was vast and ancient, its towering trees whispering secrets to the wind. By day, it was a place of wonder, with dappled sunlight filtering through emerald leaves. By night, it transformed into a labyrinth of shadows, each rustle and creak a reminder of its mysteries. It was into this labyrinth that Althea and Caden ventured, their path lit only by a sliver of moonlight. In Caden's hands was an aged map, unearthed from the castle's archives, its edges frayed and ink faded. The map had been marked with symbols Althea didn't recognize, runes of a language lost to time. But one symbol stood out, a black tower etched into the heart of the forest. "This must be where she hides," Althea whispered. her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. Caden nodded, his steps careful on the uneven ground. If the journals were right, the tower was built centuries ago by an alchemist who disappeared without a trace. It's been abandoned ever since, until now. The twins pressed on, their breaths clouding in the chill night air. As they delved deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to loom closer, their branches weaving a canopy so dense it blotted out the stars. The path grew narrower, the underbrush thicker. Every sound, the crunch of leaves beneath their boots, the distant hoot of an owl felt amplified, as though the forest itself was alive and watching. Then, through the tangle of branches, they saw it. The witch's tower stood like a shadow against the night sky. Its black stones gleamed faintly, as if absorbing the faint moonlight, and its spire reached hungrily toward the heavens. Vines twisted around its base, their thorns glinting like tiny daggers. "Looks inviting," Caden muttered, his attempt at levity falling flat. Althea didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the tower's single window, glowing with an unnatural, pulsing light. She felt a chill creep up her spine, a warning that whatever lay within was far from human. The twins approached cautiously, their movements silent. The tower's entrance was marked by a heavy wooden door, its surface carved with intricate runes. Althea traced one of the symbols with her fingers, her skin prickling at its touch. "It's a ward," she said, recognizing the pattern from her studies. "To keep out intruders." "Can you break it?" Althea hesitated. The ward's magic was complex, woven with layers of intent. But she nodded, drawing a small dagger from her belt. Using the blade's tip, she carefully scratched a counter rune into the wood, muttering an incantation under her breath. The air shimmered, and with a low groan, the door swung open. Inside, the tower was colder than the night outside. The walls were lined with shelves crammed with books, jars of strange substances, and trinkets that seemed to hum with latent power. A brazier burned in the center of the room, its flames flickering in every color imaginable. Above it, suspended in midair, was a glass orb glowing faintly. "This must be the source of her magic," Althea whispered, her gaze fixed on the brazier. Caden moved to examine the shelves, his fingers brushing against a dusty journal. Opening it, he scanned its pages, his expression darkening. "She's been planning this for years," he said. "The fireworks, the wishes, they're not just for show. She's collecting something from each wish. Energy, maybe, or pieces of their souls." Althea's stomach turned. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her feel as though the walls were closing in. "What's the final wish for?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Caden turned a page, his brow furrowing. "It says here that the final wish will release the full power of the brazier. She'll be able to bend life and death to her will. No limits, no cost. Althea's blood ran cold. We can't let her finish this. Their conversation was cut short by the sound of footsteps echoing up the stone stairs. The witch. Her presence filled the air like a storm, oppressive and electric. Althea grabbed Caden's arm, pulling him behind a heavy tapestry just as the door creaked open. The witch entered, her silhouette tall and graceful, yet utterly inhuman. Her robes shimmered like liquid night, and her hands moved with a fluidity that suggested she commanded the air itself. She approached the brazier, her voice low and melodic, as she chanted in the strange language of the runes. Althea's heart raced as the flames of the brazier flared, casting shadows that danced wildly along the walls. The witch raised the glowing orb, its light intensifying, and Althea realized with a sinking dread that the third firework was nearly complete. "We have to stop her," she mouthed to Caden. He nodded, his jaw set. They didn't have a plan yet, but one thing was certain. The witch's game was far from over, and neither were they. The witch's voice was a melody of shadows, each word laced with a power that reverberated through the stone walls of the tower. Althea and Caden remained hidden behind the tapestry, their breaths shallow, their muscles coiled. The glowing orb in the witch's hands pulsed, each beat growing brighter, more alive. "The final firework will ascend," the witch murmured, her words threading through the still air. "And with it, the culmination of my art. No longer will I bend to the will of death. I will master it." Althea's heart thundered in her chest. The brazier's flames swirled with colors that didn't belong in this world, casting eerie shapes on the walls. Caden met her gaze, his expression a mix of fear and determination. He held up the journal they'd taken from the shelf, its pages filled with notes about the magic she wielded. The witch's chant grew louder, and the orb floated above her hands, spinning slowly. The brazier's light intensified, bathing the room in an otherworldly glow. Althea's fingers tightened around her dagger as she whispered to Caden, "We have to disrupt the ritual. If that firework launches..." "It won't," he interrupted, his voice firm but quiet. "We'll stop it." The witch moved to a pedestal, placing the orb on a golden stand. Her hands danced in the air, weaving symbols that shimmered before dissolving into the flames. Althea knew they had only moments before the ritual was complete. "Now!" she hissed. Caden lunged forward, snatching the journal and hurling it into the brazier. The fire roared, consuming the book in an explosion of light. The witch spun around, her eyes blazing with fury, her voice twisting into a guttural snarl. "You dare!" she shrieked, raising a hand that crackled with violet energy. Althea didn't hesitate. She flung her dagger toward the orb, her aim true. The blade struck the glowing sphere, and a deafening crack echoed through the room as the orb splintered, its light spilling like molten gold. The brazier flared wildly, its flames reaching toward the ceiling before collapsing in on themselves with a hiss. The tower shuddered. The witch staggered, her hands clutching at the air as though trying to reclaim the magic that was slipping away. "You fools!" she cried. "You've undone centuries of work. Do you think you've won?" Althea and Caden backed away as the room grew darker. The brazier's light extinguished. The witch's form seemed to dissolve into the shadows, her voice echoing around them. "The final firework is not so easily stopped. It will rise, and its wish will be mine." Before either twin could respond, the floor beneath them trembled, and the tower erupted with a violent pulse. A streak of light shot through the window, a shard of the orb that had escaped destruction. Althea's stomach dropped. "She's right," she said, her voice barely audible. "The firework, it's still going." They burst from the tower into the cold night air, the sky above them alive with magic. The firework streaked upward, its trajectory impossibly fast, carving through the heavens with a tail of shimmering light. The final firework. "What do we do?" Caden shouted over the roar of its ascent. Althea's mind raced. The witch's journals had hinted at a counterspell, a way to sever the connection between the fireworks and the brazier. But with the orb shattered and the brazier extinguished, they had only fragments of her power to work with. "We need to rewrite her spell," she called back, grabbing Caden's hand and pulling him toward the remnants of the brazier's energy, which still smoldered faintly in the air. The firework began to unfurl in the sky, its shape taking form. It was vast, a dragon of light and shadow, its eyes glowing with malice. The crowd below, oblivious to the danger, cheered, their faces upturned in awe. Althea knelt by the fading embers of the brazier, tracing runes in the air. Her words came in a rush, each syllable heavy with effort. "Help me, Caden. It's trying to resist." Caden knelt beside her, his hands steady as he joined her in the spell. The runes they created shimmered and pulsed, fighting against the magic of the firework. The dragon above roared, its form flickering as the counterspell took hold. "It's working," Caden said, though his voice was strained. The dragon twisted in the sky, its body breaking apart into streams of light that rained down harmlessly. The crowd's cheers turned to confused murmurs, and the witch's voice echoed faintly, a fading curse. When the last spark vanished, the night fell silent. The air felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. Althea collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving. Caden placed a hand on her shoulder, his own face pale but resolute. "It's over," he said. Althea looked up at the empty sky, her lips pressed into a thin line. "No," she said softly. "Not yet. She's still out there." The witch's magic had been disrupted, her final firework extinguished. But Althea knew this was only a temporary victory. The witch was no ordinary foe. and her ambition would not be so easily defeated. For now, though, the kingdom was safe, and Althea and Caden would be ready for whatever came next. The festival square was quiet when Althea and Caden returned, their faces shadowed by exhaustion and the weight of what they had witnessed. The remnants of the crowd lingered, their excitement cooled by confusion. They had seen the firework, a spectacle beyond imagination, and then watched as it dissolved into nothingness. Whispers floated like restless ghosts among the villagers, speculating about what had happened. But Althea knew the truth. The fireworks' destruction had not been the end. The witch's magic had been woven too deeply into the fabric of the night, and the final spark still lingered. She and Caden moved through the thinning crowd, their cloaks pulled tight against the cold. The brazier's energy, faint but present, pulsed in her chest like an unwelcome heartbeat. It called to her, drawing her eyes to the darkened sky where no stars dared to shine. "She's not gone," Althea murmured, her voice barely audible. Caden's jaw tightened. The firework was her masterpiece. Without it, her power is fractured but not broken, she finished. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Caden nodded reluctantly. The brazier's embers, though scattered, still carried traces of the witch's intent. The magic was incomplete, restless, and dangerous. Later that night, the twins returned to the castle, their steps echoing in the empty halls. The once bright corridors seemed darker, as if the witch's lingering presence had seeped into the stones themselves. In the library, they pored over the witch's journal, its pages smeared with ash, but still legible. "She's bound her magic to the sparks," Althea said, flipping through the book. Each firework contained not just power, but intent. Even though the final firework is gone, its remnants are scattered across the kingdom. Caden frowned. "And if she reclaims them?" Althea's hand stilled on the page, her heart sinking. "She could reignite the ritual." The realization spurred them into action. Armed with the fragments of knowledge they had gathered, they crafted a spell of their own. A tether to track the sparks before the witch could. It was crude and imperfect. A patchwork of runes and incantations stitched together from old texts and intuition. But it was all they had. As the spell took shape, the library grew colder, the air heavy with anticipation. When the final rune was drawn, a faint light appeared, floating like a will-o'-the-wisp. It pulsed faintly, leading them out into the night. The wisp guided them beyond the castle walls, through the sleeping village and into the forest's edge. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint hum of unseen life. Shadows shifted between the trees, and Althea felt the familiar chill of the witch's magic creeping closer. The wisp stopped abruptly in a clearing, where the last ember of the brazier flickered weakly against the frost-covered ground. The spark was small, almost pitiful, but its presence radiated with a latent, malevolent energy. "She's close," Caden said, drawing his sword. Before Althea could respond, the air around them shifted, and the shadows coalesced into a figure. The witch emerged, her form as fluid and insubstantial as smoke, her eyes burning with cold fire. "You should have let it burn," she hissed, her voice curling through the clearing like a serpent. "You think you've stopped me, but you've only delayed the inevitable." Althea stepped forward, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Your power comes at the cost of others. We won't let you finish this." The witch laughed, a sound that sent the trees trembling. "Do you think you understand my magic? I am not bound by your mortal rules. The spark you destroyed was only a fraction of what I can create." She raised her hands, and the ember on the ground flared, its light spilling into the sky like a beacon. Althea acted instinctively, raising her own hands and reciting the counterspell they had prepared. Caden stood beside her, his blade catching the faint glow of the spark as he guarded her from the witch's advancing shadow. The ember pulsed, caught in a battle between the witch's will and their spell. The clearing erupted with light and sound, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Althea poured every ounce of her strength into the incantation, feeling the magic strain and stretch as if on the verge of snapping. With a final blinding burst, the ember exploded, its energy scattering harmlessly into the night. The witch screamed, her form unraveling into smoke, her voice fading like the dying wind. When the clearing fell silent, Althea and Caden stood motionless, their breaths heavy. The forest seemed to exhale with them, its oppressive weight lifting. The spark was gone, and with it, the last remnants of the witch's firework. Back at the castle, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. Althea watched the sun rise from her window, its light chasing away the darkness that had lingered too long. Caden joined her, his expression weary but triumphant. "She'll try again," he said quietly. Althea nodded. "She will. But so will we." The witch's fireworks had been extinguished, but their lesson remained. Magic, like fire, could bring light or destruction, and it was their duty to protect the balance. Together, they turned from the window, their bond forged anew by the trials they had faced. The kingdom was safe for now, and though the witch's shadow had receded, they knew it would return. But when it did, they would be ready.